What is happening, guys? Gary Yaman here, back at it again with a new video. I hope you're doing well, I hope you're safe and healthy. Let's begin right away with this comparison video. We're going to compare the Sony A7 III against or versus the Nikon Z5. So both very capable, both very similar, but also there are many differences. So we're going to talk about those differences and see which one is the better one or which one is the better one for you. First thing that I want to discuss is the build quality, and with that I mean just the outside of the camera itself, you know, the body, how it feels in the hand and stuff like that. So let's begin right away with the Nikon Z5 first, and directly once you have it in your hands you feel a big difference between the both of them. The Nikon just feels better, it has a better grip, more natural to the hand compared to the Sony. The Sony feels like very, if you got smaller hands, then you don't have to worry about a thing. But if you got bigger hands, the Sony is a little bit more uncomfortable compared to the Nikon. The Nikon, you got a full grip with your hands. With the Sony, just as always, that the pinky is always left behind. So when it comes down to the grip, this one goes to the Nikon. But in overall, the cameras, both they look pretty much the same, right? We got a nice big mode dial, we got the on and off switch, we got the aperture and the shutter speed dials, right, a joystick and stuff like that. So when it comes down to the design itself, they are both pretty much the same, but there are still some differences when it comes down to like the on the left side, for instance. Both of them, they have the inputs there, you know, the IOs. They have, both of them have the IOs there, so where you put the USB-C and the microphone jack and headphone jack, stuff like that in it. Both of them are on the left side, but those little doors, you know, the little flappy thingies, flippy flappy things. On the Sony it feels very plasticky, there is no rubber sealing whatsoever, and on the Nikon it feels very robust. It is made from rubber and you just know that this is better suited for like bad weather conditions and rainy days and stuff like that. I actually used the Nikon on a blizzard and I wouldn't do that with the Sony without no protection, and the Nikon was just doing pretty fine during this little blizzard that we have here in the Netherlands. But you know, in general, when it comes down to the build quality, like bad weather conditions type of stuff, then the Nikon is definitely the better one. The Sony is a camera coming from 2018, so it's lacking a little bit behind when it comes down to the brightness and just how the images are looking on your screen itself. And the Nikon is also a touchscreen compared to the Sony. The Sony has a limited touchscreen, so you can pinpoint your focus, but that's about it. You cannot navigate through the menu system such as with the Nikon. Also, what I really like is that both of them have dual SD card slots, but the difference here is that the Nikon has two UHS 2 card slots and the Sony just has one. Other than that, the battery itself, both of them are really great. You can use one battery for a full day, so that's really nice. You know, when it comes down to the build quality itself, I have to give it to the Nikon because that one just feels better in the hand, but also has like more protection when compared to the Sony. Alright, let's talk about more interesting stuff, and that is the image quality. So for both photo and video, when it comes down to image quality, what is the real difference? Which one is better? And for this one, I have to give it to the Sony. And the main reason for that is that the Sony has a backlit illuminated sensor, right? So in general, it just means that it has a better dynamic range flexibility. So with that, I mean you can recover the shadows or the highlights much better, or a little bit better than the Nikon. Don't get me wrong, guys, the Nikon is still really good when it comes down to correcting your image, but if you got like a very high dynamic range kind of image, then the Sony is just handling things a little bit more better and more, there's more flexibility when it comes down to the photo image quality, right? So as you see here in the following image, it is easy to see that the Sony can like almost recover from total black to a real usable image. But the Nikon, you simply cannot do it because your image will be very damaged and just falls apart, right? But again, don't get me wrong, if you set up your exposure really nicely, then the Nikon will do really well compared to the Sony. But you know, it really depends on your exposure and your like type of photography that you're doing. If you are somebody that does a lot of high dynamic, high contrasty things, then I would suggest go with the Sony because then you got more flexibility. The same goes for video. If you want to do a lot of video work, the Sony is the one to go. But when in regards to image quality, you know, you got for the Sony you got 4K up to 30 frames per second. The same goes with the Nikon, but with the Nikon Z5 you got a severe crop. It has a 1.7x crop, so that is like a crop sensor camera almost. So that is a big negative for me. For instance, this video right now, he will be like cropped into my face, all the way up in my face. That is something that I didn't really like, and just and overall the image quality itself, it is okay, it is usable, but I really want to step up that little game. And with the Nikon, you cannot shoot in any log profiles as compared to the Sony. You can shoot in like HLG, S-Log, and those cine profiles. But also straight out of camera, it just looks a little bit better than compared to the Nikon. But do keep in mind that the Nikon is still very usable, but not as flexible as with the Sony. Also, the Sony can do 1080p up to 120 frames per second. That is something that I use on a regular basis for my B-roll shots. And with the Nikon, you can do 1080p up to 60 frames per second. But still, that's not really a nice, like it's a little bit soft and not as nice as with the Sony. So for image quality wise, you know, both can do pretty much the same things, but if you want that extra flexibility, then you have to go with the Sony. Alright, so now we're gonna talk about the autofocus performance, but also some extra features and stuff. Which one is the better one? So first of all, the autofocus in photo. Both of them are doing a real good job, but for me personally, I think the Sony just is more, just a little bit more reliable when compared to the Nikon. The Nikon is a little bit, you know, even though there is a subject in front of it that is very obvious that this is a person or a face, somehow it does not always see the face or does not detect the face right away. So that is something that you have to navigate through, that you have to learn how to work with your camera. So if you are like if you know this camera, the Z5 by the back of your hand, if you know what I mean, right? If you know everything about it, if you master this camera, then I'm pretty sure that you can, then the autofocus is not an issue at all, and you just pinpoint or just tap on the subject that you want and everything will be pretty fine. So but then again, if you don't want to do those things, those extra steps, the Sony is the way to go. It's just more reliable and just more easy to work with. Especially for me as a wedding photographer, you don't want to pinpoint your focus all the time. It's just a little bit too much hassle for such a dynamic day. So the Nikon is a little bit lagging behind, but still really good as well, but not as good as the Sony. The same goes for video. I think for video it's a little bit different as well because it just behaves differently. You do got more flexibility with the Nikon, more options to have it fast, have it like autofocus faster or respond faster. In comparison to the Sony, you don't get that many options. But somehow with the Nikon, when it sees a face, it's not always in focus. I'm not sure why, but still, again, if you master the camera, you can still use the autofocus really well, and then you will be very happy with it. But here, the Sony goes straight out of the box. The Sony is the better one when it comes down to the autofocus for photo, but also for video. Alright, extra features. What does the Sony have in comparison to the Nikon, and what does the Nikon have in comparison to the Sony? So the Sony, as I mentioned, has more flexibility in the photos department when it comes down to like recovering from your shadows and highlights, but also for video it can shoot in 1080p up to 120 frames per second and also shoot in those log files, which is really nice if you want to do lots of video. So the Sony, when it comes down to like a real hybrid shooter type of person, then the Sony is the one for you. There are things that the Nikon has in comparison to the Sony, and one of those things is pixel shift. And pixel shift is actually, it's almost like HDR photos, right? It takes multiple exposures, but it will shift the sensor a little bit, and then you get a nice big photo like of 140 megabytes or something like that. So that is really nice if you are into that. But one of the best features that it has, and that the Sony simply does not have, is time-lapse video. So video time lapses, and that is something that I personally really like, and just so easy to set up. You can just put your camera somewhere where you want to be, set up the exposure, put the time in, and then you're good to go. It will make automatically a nice video for you up to 4K or up to 1080p, whatever you want. So that is really cool, that's really nice. and I wish the Sony cameras had that, but that's the main difference. Other difference is that the Sony and Nikon can do like burst photos, so burst stills, but there is a difference. As you see here in the following clip, you see that the Nikon is a little bit slower, right? It can do 4.5 frames per second, and that is actually quite slow in comparison to the Sony. It can do like 11 or 12 or something like that shots per second. But there is a difference when it comes down to clearing out the buffer. With the Nikon, you can go all the way through. You can just go on and go on. And the Sony, it will stop eventually, and then you have to wait for it to clear the buffer, because you cannot do anything during that clearing of the buffer type of thing. So that is the biggest difference. The Sony is faster, but it takes time to clear the buffer. The Nikon is slower, but for that you don't have to wait so long to for it to clear the buffer. So that is that's the biggest difference. I think that's about it for all the things that I needed to say in this little comparison video. So let's like do a final verdict, final decision type of thing. Which one is the best for you? So if you are a hybrid shooter, if you do a lot of photos but also a lot of videos, then the Sony is the one for you. But if you do a lot of photo, and you know, the Nikon is of course also a little bit cheaper than the Sony, then the Nikon is the way to go for you. Keep in mind as well that if you want to do a lot of video work as well with the Nikon, then I strongly suggest you should check out the Nikon Z6 or the C7. There's also a version 2 of both of those cameras if you really are into like hybrid shooting. And when it comes down to lens options, both of them have a real big lens selection right now. I think the Nikon, if you have that adapter for the older lenses, you have a lot, like really a lot of lens options compared to the Sony. But still, both of them are actually really affordable when it comes down to like the lens options as well. So I think that's it. Which one do you like? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you got any questions or any comments, let me know as well. Then we can just have a little discussion or anything. So, right, I think that's it. So if you like the video, subscribe if not already, right? It is free, so go ahead and subscribe if you want. And I think that's it, man. So as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one. Good luck.